The cold didn't care who you were. It didn't care if you were a school teacher with soft hands and clean fingernails. Didn't care if you'd once taught children their letters in a warm classroom with sunlight pouring through glass windows. The Montana winter didn't give a damn about your past. It only cared if you'd survived the next hour. Evelyn Carter wasn't sure she would. Her boots, thin-soled, meant for town streets, punched through the crusted snow with each step, and the wind cut through her wool coat like it wasn't even there. Her fingers had stopped hurting 20 minutes ago, which she knew was bad. Real bad. They'd gone from burning to numb, and now they just felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. She could barely see 10 feet ahead through the swirling white. The road, if you could call it that, had disappeared under the snowdrifts, and she was navigating by instinct now, following the fence line she'd spotted before the blizzard swallowed everything whole. 3 days ago, she'd had a job, a room, a future. Now she had a canvas bag with 2 dresses, a water-damaged book of poetry, and $12 that wouldn't buy her passage out of this frozen hell, even if there was a train still running, which there wasn't. The rails were snowed in until spring, and spring was 4 months away. She'd lost the teaching position because of Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard, the superintendent's wife, who'd decided that Evelyn was too familiar with her husband during a school board meeting. Never mind that Evelyn had been discussing curriculum. Never mind that she'd kept her eyes on her notes the entire time. Mrs. Pritchard had made her accusation over tea with the other town wives, and by sunset, Evelyn's contract was voided. The boarding house followed. Mrs. Simmons, the landlady, didn't want that kind of woman under her roof. Never mind that Evelyn had paid through the month. Never mind that she'd never so much as looked at a man sideways. Small towns had long memories and short fuses. So here she was, walking into a blizzard because the alternative was freezing to death in a doorway, while decent Christian folks stepped over her body. Her lungs burned with each breath. The air was so cold it felt sharp, like inhaling broken glass. She'd wrapped her scarf over her mouth and nose, but it was soaked through now, frozen stiff against her face. She wasn't sure how long she'd been walking. An hour? 2? Time did strange things when you couldn't feel your feet anymore. The fence posts were her lifeline, rough-hewn timber markers spaced every dozen yards. She lurched from one to the next, clinging to each one for a moment before forcing herself onward. If she stopped too long, she wouldn't start again. The wind screamed across the open prairie, a sound like nothing human. It whipped snow into her eyes, her mouth, down the collar of her coat. Her skirt was frozen solid below the knee, the fabric crackling with each step. I'm going to die out here. The thought arrived with strange clarity, almost calm. She'd read once about people freezing to death, how they got confused near the end, started seeing things that weren't there, started feeling warm. She wasn't warm yet, but the edges of her vision were getting fuzzy, and her thoughts were starting to drift. She thought about her mother, dead 6 years now. Wondered if there was anything after this, or if dying just meant the cold finally won. Then her hand hit something different. Not a fence post, a gate. Evelyn stopped, swaying, squinting through the snow. There was a gap in the fence line, and beyond it, barely visible through the white, a darker shape. A building. A house. Her heart kicked once, hard, against her ribs. She fumbled with the gate latch, her numb fingers barely able to grip it. It took 3 tries before it swung open, and she stumbled through, leaving it hanging. The house materialized out of the storm like something from a dream. 2 stories, solid timber, smoke rising from the chimney. There were outbuildings too, a barn, a bunkhouse maybe, but all she cared about was that smoke. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Warmth meant not dying. She made it halfway across the yard before her legs quit. She went down hard, her knees hitting frozen earth under the snow. The canvas bag slipped from her shoulder. She tried to get up, managed to get 1 foot under her, and fell again. Her vision tunneled, black creeping in from the edges. Get up, get up, get up. She couldn't. The front door of the house opened, yellow light spilled out, warm and impossible. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, backlit by the fire inside. Evelyn tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, lost in the wind. The figure didn't move. She reached out one hand, desperate, pleading. Then everything went dark. She woke up hurting. That was the first thing she registered, pain. Her fingers and toes burned like they were on fire. A deep, vicious ache that made her gasp. Her face throbbed. Her chest felt like someone had been kicking it. The second thing she registered was warmth. Evelyn opened her eyes. She was lying on a wooden floor in front of a fireplace, wrapped in heavy blankets that smelled like wood smoke and horses. The fire crackled a few feet away, throwing orange light across rough timber walls. Above her, exposed beams crossed the ceiling. A simple room, functional. No decoration except for a rifle mounted over the mantel and a pair of worn boots by the door. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her head spun and her stomach lurched. "Don't." The voice came from her left, low, flat, not particularly friendly. Evelyn turned her head slowly. A man sat in a wooden chair maybe 6 feet away, watching her. He was somewhere in his 30s, she guessed, with dark hair starting to go gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile a long time ago. Broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else. His eyes were the color of winter ice, and about as warm. He held a tin cup in one hand, steam rising from it. "You came close," he said. "Another 20 minutes, and you'd have been dead." His tone made it clear he wasn't looking for thanks. Evelyn tried to speak. Her throat was raw, her voice barely a croak. "Where?" "My ranch. 5 miles west of town if you were trying to get there." He took a sip from his cup. "You weren't going to make it." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather herself. Her whole body ached, but the burning in her extremities was starting to ease into something more manageable. That was good. Meant she probably wasn't going to lose any fingers. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn Carter." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected as much. "Heard about you, school teacher? Got yourself run out." Of course he'd heard. Everyone had heard. That was how small towns worked. "I didn't—" She stopped herself. There was no point. He'd already decided what kind of woman she was. They all had. "Thank you for bringing me inside. Didn't have much choice." He stood, walked to the fireplace, and poured something from a kettle into a second cup. "You die on my property. That's my problem. Sheriff asking questions, townfolk making it my business." He held the cup out to her. "Drink. It's just tea." Evelyn struggled to sit up, keeping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her dress was gone. She was wearing a man's shirt, way too big, and nothing else that she could tell. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her face neutral. He'd probably saved her life by getting her out of wet clothes. No sense being prissy about it now. She took the cup with shaking hands. The tea was bitter and scalding hot, but it felt like heaven going down. The man walked back to his chair and sat down, watching her with those cold, assessing eyes. "I'm Caleb Boone," he said finally. "This is my land, my house." "I didn't mean to intrude. Where were you going?" She hesitated. "I don't know, somewhere." "That's a good way to die." I noticed. For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, but it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "Storm's not letting up," Caleb said. "You're stuck here till it clears. Could be a day, could be 3. Evelyn nodded slowly. She didn't have a choice, and they both knew it. "There's a room upstairs," he continued. "Used to be storage. I'll put you there. You stay out of the way, don't make trouble, and we'll get you back to town when the weather breaks." "I'm not going back to town." He raised an eyebrow. "No?" "There's nothing for me there." Caleb studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged. "That's your business, but you can't stay here. I'm not asking to." "Good." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Evelyn sipped her tea and tried not to think about what came next. She had $12, no prospects, and nowhere to go. The train wouldn't run until spring. She couldn't survive 4 months on $12. She was going to die out here, one way or another. Unless— "Mr. Boone," she said slowly, "you live here alone?" His expression shuddered immediately. "That's not your concern." "I'm just asking—" "I know what you're asking." His voice went hard. "And the answer is no. I don't need company, I don't need help, and I sure as hell don't need some desperate woman thinking she can trade her way into a warm bed." Evelyn felt her face go hot. "That's not what I— Isn't it?" He leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You got run out of town for being too friendly with married men, And now you're here, alone with me, asking if I live by myself. You think I'm stupid? I think you're making assumptions, she shot back, anger flaring through the exhaustion. I didn't do anything wrong in town. Mrs. Pritchard lied because her husband looked at me during a meeting and she needed someone to blame. I lost my job, my home, and my reputation because of gossip and spite. So no, I'm not looking to trade anything. I'm looking to survive the winter without freezing to death. If that offends you, I apologize. Caleb sat back slowly, his jaw tight. I have 2 sons, he said finally. 7 and 9. Their mother died 2 years ago. I run this ranch with 3 hired men and I keep the house running myself. I don't need a woman here complicating things. Evelyn heard what he didn't say. I don't trust you. Fair enough. She didn't trust him either. I understand, she said quietly. I'll leave when the storm clears. See that you do. He stood and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the fire and her thoughts. The storm didn't clear. It raged for 2 more days, piling snow against the house until the windows on the north side were half buried. Evelyn stayed in the small room upstairs, barely more than a closet with a cot and a broken chair, and tried to stay out of the way. But the house was small, and avoiding Caleb was impossible. She saw him in the mornings, cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Simple food, cooked badly. Burned bacon, undercooked beans, biscuits that could have been used as ammunition. He ate like it didn't matter, shoveling food into his mouth while he read a week-old newspaper. She saw his sons too. The older one was named Thomas, thin and serious, with his father's dark hair and wary eyes. The younger was Levi, gap-toothed and curious, with a spray of freckles across his nose. They watched her like she was a dangerous animal that might bolt or bite at any moment. She tried to smile at them once. Levi ducked behind his brother. On the second day, she ventured downstairs to wash her dress. Caleb was outside checking on the livestock, and the kitchen was empty. She'd just started heating water on the stove when the back door burst open and the boys tumbled in, red-cheeked and breathless from playing in the snow. They froze when they saw her. I'm just washing my clothes, Evelyn said quickly. I'll be out of your way in a minute. Thomas narrowed his eyes. Pa said you're leaving when the storm stops. That's right. Good. Levi tugged on his brother's sleeve. Tommy, she's not staying, Thomas said firmly, his voice pitched too loud, too defensive. Pa said. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. I heard him. Our ma's dead, Levi blurted out suddenly. She got sick and died, and now it's just us and Pa. Levi, shut up, Thomas hissed. But Levi ignored him, staring at Evelyn with wide, solemn eyes. Are you going to be our new ma? No, Evelyn said gently. I'm not. Well, why not? Because your father doesn't want me here, and that's fine. I have my own life to figure out. Where are you going to go? Levi asked. I don't know yet. You could stay here, he offered. We got lots of room, and Pa's cooking is real bad. Despite everything, Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips. I noticed. Thomas grabbed his brother's arm and dragged him toward the stairs. Come on, Pa's going to be mad if he finds you talking to her. They disappeared upstairs, leaving Evelyn alone with the heating water and a strange ache in her chest. That night she heard them through the walls, the boys arguing in hushed whispers, and Caleb's low voice cutting through, telling them to settle down and go to sleep. Later she heard footsteps in the hallway, pacing back and forth for what felt like hours. She wondered if he slept at all. Okan. On the third morning, the wind finally died. Evelyn woke to silence, real silence, without the howl of the storm. She got dressed quickly, her clean dress stiff but wearable, and came downstairs to find Caleb standing by the window, staring out at a world buried in white. Storm's done, he said without turning around. I'll hitch the wagon after I clear the road. Get you back to town by afternoon. I told you I'm not going back to town. Then where? I'll figure it out. He turned to look at her, his expression hard. You got money? Friends? Family? No? Then you'll starve. Or freeze. Or worse. He crossed his arms. You go back to town. At least you got a chance. Someone might take pity on you, give you work. No one in that town is going to give me anything except more grief, Evelyn said. I'm better off taking my chances somewhere else. Where? I don't know. The words came out sharper than she intended. She took a breath, steadying herself. I don't know, but I'll figure it out. I always do. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, he shook his head. You're a fool. Maybe, but I'm not your problem. That's right, you're not. He turned back to the window, and Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was it. He was going to send her away, and she'd be right back where she started, except colder, weaker, and with even fewer options. Mr. Boone, I need someone to cook, he said abruptly, and clean. Watch the boys when I'm working. I can't keep running the ranch and the house. I'm barely managing as it is. Evelyn went still. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a deal. He turned to face her, his expression flat and businesslike. You work through winter. I'll pay you a wage. Not much, but enough to buy passage out of here when spring comes, room and board included. You keep the house running, look after the boys, and stay out of my way. Come April, you're gone. It wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't kindness. That much was clear from his tone. It was practicality. He needed help, and she needed a place to stay. Simple transaction. What about the boys? She asked carefully. Do they get a say? No. And the hired men? They don't live in the house. What happens here isn't their business. Evelyn studied his face, trying to read what was behind those cold eyes. He was offering her a lifeline, but it came with strings. She'd be working for a man who clearly didn't trust her, living under his roof with two boys who didn't want her there. But it was better than dying. All right, she said. I'll take the deal. Caleb nodded once, curt. Good. You start today. Boys need breakfast, and I need to get out to the barn. There's food in the pantry. Figure it out. He grabbed his coat and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his boots crunch through the snow outside. Then she turned and started looking for a frying pan. The first week was hell. The boys wouldn't talk to her. They answered her questions with one-word responses, ate her food in sullen silence, and disappeared upstairs the moment they were done. Thomas watched her with open suspicion, and Levi followed his brother's lead, though she caught him glancing at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. Caleb was worse. He barely acknowledged her existence. He'd come in from the cold, track snow and mud across the floor she'd just cleaned, eat whatever she'd cooked without comment, and leave again. If she asked him a question, he'd grunt a response. If she tried to make conversation, he'd walk away. The hired men, 3 rough-weathered cowboys named Jack, Pete, and Sam, kept their distance. They took their meals in the bunkhouse and only came to the main house when Caleb called them. They tipped their hats when they saw her but didn't linger. She was alone in a house full of people. But Evelyn had been alone before. She knew how to survive it. She woke before dawn to get the fire going and start breakfast. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, and kept the house from falling apart. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and tried not to think about the fact that this was exactly the kind of life she'd been trying to escape back east. At night, she'd lie in her narrow cot and listen to the wind rattling the windows, wondering if she'd made a mistake. But then, on the 8th day, something changed. She was in the kitchen making bread when Levi came downstairs, moving slow and careful. His face was flushed, and his eyes looked glassy. You all right? Evelyn asked, wiping flour from her hands. My stomach hurts, he mumbled. She crossed the room and pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. You've got a fever, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Where's your father? Out with the cattle. Won't be back till supper. Damn. Evelyn guided Levi to a chair and made him sit. Stay here. I'll get you some water. She spent the next hour trying to cool him down. Wet cloths on his forehead, sips of water, a blanket when he started shivering. He was getting worse fast, his temperature climbing despite everything she tried. By the time Caleb came in, Levi was barely conscious. Caleb took one look at his son and went pale. What happened? His voice was tight, controlled. He came down sick this morning, Evelyn said quickly. I've been trying to bring the fever down, but it's not working. He needs a doctor. There's no doctor. Closest one is in town and the roads are still blocked. Then we need to do something else. You have any medicine? Willow bark? Anything? Caleb shook his head, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. He moved to Levi's side, scooping the boy up in his arms. I'll take him upstairs. He stopped, meeting her eyes. You know anything about this? Some. My mother was sick for a long time before she died. I learned a few things. Then help him. It wasn't a request. Evelyn followed him upstairs to the boys' room, a small space with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the yard. Caleb laid Levi down gently, and Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face white. "Is he gonna die?" Thomas whispered. "No," Caleb said firmly. "He's not." But Evelyn saw the fear in his eyes. She spent the rest of the day at Levi's bedside, doing everything she could think of. She kept him cool, forced water down his throat when he'd take it, and talked to him in a low, steady voice even when he didn't respond. Thomas hovered in the doorway, refusing to leave. Caleb paced the hallway, coming in every few minutes to check. By midnight, the fever broke. Levi opened his eyes, looked at her with confused recognition, and croaked, "I'm thirsty." Evelyn nearly sobbed with relief. She gave him water, slow sips, and watched as color started to come back into his face. When she finally left the room, exhausted and wrung out, she found Caleb sitting on the stairs, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard her. "He's going to be fine," Evelyn said quietly. "Fever broke. He'll be weak for a few days, but he'll recover." Caleb closed his eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted, just slightly, but enough that she noticed. "Thank you," he said. The words sounded rusty, like he wasn't used to saying them. "You're welcome." He stood slowly, his movements heavy with exhaustion. "You should get some sleep." "So should you." For a moment they just stood there in the dim hallway, 2 people who didn't trust each other but had just survived something together. Then Caleb nodded once and walked away. Oh, after that things were different. Not easy, not friendly, but different. Thomas stopped glaring at her quite so much. Levi started talking to her when his brother wasn't around, asking questions about where she'd come from and what it was like to be a teacher. Caleb still didn't say much, but he stopped tracking mud through the house. And once, she caught him almost smiling when she made a joke about his terrible coffee. The days settled into a routine. She cooked, cleaned, and kept the boys occupied while Caleb worked the ranch. The hired men started taking meals in the main house again, and Jack, the oldest of the 3, told her stories about cattle drives and bar fights, while Pete and Sam argued over who cheated at cards. Winter deepened, the snow piled higher, the nights got colder, and slowly, almost without meaning to, Evelyn started to feel like maybe she belonged here. It was a dangerous feeling. She'd learned a long time ago not to get attached to places or people. Attachment meant loss, and she'd already lost enough. So she kept her head down, did her work, and told herself that come spring she'd take her wages and move on. But some nights when the fire was crackling and the boys were doing their lessons at the kitchen table and Caleb was reading his paper in the corner, she'd look around and feel something loosen in her chest, something that felt almost like home. She didn't let herself think about what that meant. It was late February when the first real trouble started. Evelyn was in the barn feeding the chickens when she heard raised voices from outside. She set down the feed bucket and walked to the door, peering out. Caleb was standing in the yard, facing 3 men on horseback. They weren't his hired men. These were strangers, dressed in heavy coats and hats pulled low. The lead rider was a big man with a thick beard and a rifle across his saddle. "Told you before, Boone," the man was saying, his voice carrying across the snow. "Land's worth more to the railroad than it is to you. Sell now, and you'll walk away with a fair price. Hold out, and you'll regret it." "I'm not selling," Caleb said flatly. "I already told your boss that. Mr. Vance doesn't take no for an answer." "Then he's going to be disappointed." The bearded man leaned forward in his saddle, his expression hardening. "You got a family here, Boone. 2 boys. Be a shame if something happened to them because you were too stubborn to see sense." The temperature in the yard seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb's hand moved slowly toward his belt, where Evelyn knew he kept a pistol. "You threatening my sons? I'm telling you how things are. You're sitting on valuable land, and Vance wants it. One way or another, he's going to get it. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Choice is yours." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Caleb said quietly, "Get off my property." The bearded man smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We'll be back." He turned his horse and rode off, the other two following. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Caleb stood in the yard, staring after them, his fists clenched at his sides. Evelyn stepped out of the barn. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Caleb said without looking at her. "Go back inside." "They threatened your sons. I said go inside." His voice was hard as iron, and Evelyn knew better than to push. She turned and walked back to the house, her heart pounding. But as she reached the door, she glanced back and saw Caleb still standing there, alone in the snow, staring at the horizon like he could see the storm coming. And she knew, with cold certainty, that this was only the beginning. That night, Caleb didn't come in for dinner. Evelyn kept the food warm on the stove, checking the window every few minutes. The boys sat at the table, picking at their plates. Thomas was quiet, but Levi kept glancing toward the door, his leg bouncing under the table. "Where's Pa?" he asked for the third time. "He'll be in when he's ready," Evelyn said, trying to sound calm. "He's been out there forever." "Eat your food." Thomas pushed his plate away. "Something's wrong. Your father can handle himself." "You don't know that." Evelyn turned from the stove, meeting Thomas's eyes. The boy was scared, trying hard not to show it, but scared all the same. She recognized that look. She'd worn it herself enough times. "You're right," she said. "I don't know that. But what I do know is that your father's been running this ranch for a long time, and he's still here. That tells me he knows how to deal with trouble. Those men today, I saw them. They're going to come back. I heard what they said." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron, thinking carefully before she spoke. "Probably they will, but your father's not alone. He's got Jack and Pete and Sam, and he's got you two, which means he's got more reason to fight than most men do." Levi looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Are we going to have to fight?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know how to fight." "Then let's hope it doesn't come to that." The door opened, bringing in a blast of cold air, and Caleb behind it. His face was dark, unreadable. He kicked the snow off his boots and hung his coat without looking at any of them. "Pa?" Levi ventured. "Eat," Caleb said shortly. "Then get to bed. Both of you." "But now." The boys scrambled up from the table and headed for the stairs. Levi cast one last worried glance back before Thomas pulled him along. Evelyn waited until she heard their footsteps overhead before she spoke. "You need to eat." "Not hungry. You haven't eaten since breakfast." Caleb finally looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion in his face. Not just physical, something deeper. He walked to the table and sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Those men," Evelyn said quietly. "They're serious." "I know." "Who's Vance?" Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "Railroad man. Bought up half the territory over the last 2 years. Wants this land because it's got water and good grazing. Prime route for his cattle operations." He picked up his fork, stared at his plate like he'd forgotten what food was. "I told him no 6 months ago. Thought that was the end of it." "Apparently not." "Apparently not." Evelyn pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "What are you going to do? What do you think? I'm not selling. Even if they come back?" "Especially if they come back." His jaw tightened. "This land belonged to my father. He carved it out of nothing, broke his back working it, and passed it to me when he died. I'm not handing it over to some railroad bastard who thinks he can scare me off my own property. And if they don't stop at threats?" Caleb met her eyes. "Then I'll do what I have to do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Evelyn had known men like this before. Men who'd plant their feet and refuse to move even when the smart thing would be to bend. Her father had been that way. Stubborn as a mule, her mother used to say. He'd fought with neighbors over fence lines, argued with the bank over loans, stood his ground on principle, even when principle was the only thing he had left. It had killed him. Stress and stubbornness, and a heart that gave out one winter morning while he was splitting wood. "What about the boys?" she asked. Something flickered across Caleb's face, pain, quick and sharp. "They're the reason I'm not selling. I won't let Vance take what's theirs. They'd rather have you alive than have the land. You don't know that. I know what it's like to watch someone you love choose a fight they can't win." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Who was that?" Evelyn looked away. She hadn't meant to say that much. My father. He fought everything, the weather, the land, anyone who crossed him. It didn't matter that he was outnumbered or outmatched. He'd rather die than back down. She paused. He did die, and it didn't change anything except that he was gone. The silence stretched out between them. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I'm not your father, Caleb said finally. I know. This is different. Maybe. He picked up his fork again, took a bite, chewed mechanically. I've got 3 men and enough ammunition to hold off an army. They want this land, they'll have to take it over my dead body. That's what I'm afraid of. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. You scared? He asked. Yes? Good. Shows you got sense. He took another bite. But you signed on through winter. Storm's not over yet, and neither's this. You want out? I'll understand. But if you stay knowing what's coming. Evelyn thought about it. Thought about packing her bag, taking her wages, walking away. She had enough money now to get herself somewhere else. Maybe not far, but far enough. She didn't owe these people anything. Didn't owe this place. But when she tried to picture leaving, all she could see was Levi's face when he'd been sick, and Thomas's scared eyes at the dinner table, and this man sitting across from her who was too stubborn to see that stubbornness could get him killed. I'll stay, she said. Caleb nodded slowly. All right then. He went back to eating, and Evelyn stood to clear the dishes. Neither of them said anything more, but something had shifted. Some unspoken agreement that whatever was coming, they'd face it together, at least until spring. The next week passed quietly. Too quietly. Evelyn kept expecting Vance's men to ride back up, but the days came and went with nothing but wind and snow. Caleb worked the ranch with Jack, Pete, and Sam, checking fences, tending the herd, keeping watch. He started carrying his rifle everywhere, even just to walk to the barn. The boys noticed. They didn't say much, but Evelyn saw how they watched their father, how they startled at loud noises. Thomas started sleeping with his boots on. Levi had nightmares. One morning, Evelyn was in the kitchen when she heard voices outside, sharp, urgent. She looked out the window and saw Jack running toward the house, his face red. Caleb met him at the door. What is it? Found 2 steers dead in the north pasture, Jack said, breathing hard. Wasn't wolves. Somebody shot 'em. Caleb's expression went stone cold. Show me. He grabbed his rifle and coat, and the 2 of them headed out. Evelyn watched from the window as they disappeared into the white. Her hands were shaking. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back, his face was set like granite. He didn't speak to her, didn't speak to the boys. He went straight to his room and closed the door. Evelyn found Jack in the barn later that afternoon, mucking out stalls. How bad? She asked. Jack leaned on his pitchfork, his weathered face grim. Bad enough. Somebody's sending a message. 2 more dead cattle, both shot clean through the head. Professional work. What did Caleb say? Nothing. Just stood there looking at him for a long time. Then he told me and the boys to double the watch. Nobody rides out alone anymore. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. Is it going to get worse? Lady, it's already worse. Question is how much worse it gets before something breaks. That night, Caleb called a meeting in the main room. Jack, Pete, and Sam came in from the bunkhouse, stomping snow off their boots. The boys sat on the stairs, trying to look like they weren't listening. Caleb stood by the fireplace, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. Vance is escalating. Dead cattle's just the start. He wants us scared, wants us to feel like we're under siege. Seems to be working, Pete muttered. Maybe, but I'm not selling. Anyone here wants to leave, I understand. I'll pay you what you're owed, and no hard feelings. The 3 hired men exchanged glances. Then Jack spoke up. We ain't leaving. You sure? This could get ugly. Already is ugly. And we've been through worse. Jack shrugged. Besides, where else are we going to go in the middle of winter? At least here the food's improved. He shot a quick grin at Evelyn, and despite everything, she felt a flicker of warmth. All right, Caleb said. Then here's how it's going to be. We work in pairs from now on. Nobody rides out alone. Nobody goes unarmed. We keep the livestock close and the horses ready. If Vance's men come back, we don't engage unless we have to. But if they force it, we defend this place. Sam, the youngest of the three, shifted uncomfortably. You think it'll come to shooting? I think we need to be ready in case it does. What about the law? Pete asked. Sheriff's got to do something about this. Caleb's laugh was bitter. Sheriff's on Vance's payroll, has been for a year. You think he's going to ride out here and help us? Silence. So we're on our own, Jack said. We're on our own. After the hired men left, Evelyn put the boys to bed. They didn't argue, but she could see the fear in their faces. Levi clung to her for a moment before climbing under the covers. We're going to be okay, right? He whispered. Yes, Evelyn said, smoothing his hair back. We are. Promise? She wanted to promise him that everything would be fine, that his father would keep them safe, that the bad men would go away. But she'd learned a long time ago that promises were dangerous things. I promise I'll do everything I can, she said instead. How's that? Levi thought about it, then nodded. Okay. She kissed his forehead and turned down the lamp. When she came out into the hallway, she found Caleb leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. You didn't lie to him, he said quietly. I don't lie to children. Most people would have told him everything's fine. Everything's not fine. No, it's not. He pushed off the wall. But you handled it right. Thank you. It was the second time he'd thanked her. She was starting to think maybe he didn't hate her after all. Mr. Boone, Caleb, he said, if we're going to be fighting a war together, you might as well use my name. Caleb. The name felt strange in her mouth. I know you don't want to sell, but have you thought about what happens if this gets worse? If someone gets hurt? Every damn minute. And? He looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion again, the weight he was carrying, alone. My wife used to ask me the same thing. When she got sick, she wanted me to sell the ranch, move to town where she could see a doctor regular. Said the land wasn't worth dying for. He paused. I told her we'd be fine, that I'd take care of her here, that we didn't need to leave. His voice dropped. She died anyway, and I've been wondering ever since if I made the right choice. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. There was nothing to say, no words that would ease that kind of guilt. I'm not making the same mistake twice, Caleb continued. This land's all my boys have left of their mother. It's their inheritance, their future. I won't let some railroad bastard take it because he thinks he can. Even if it costs you everything? Even then. They stood there as the dim hallway, two people bound by circumstance and stubbornness and something neither of them wanted to name. Get some sleep, Caleb said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He was right about that. The trouble came 3 days later, just after dawn. Evelyn was making breakfast when she heard shouting from outside. She dropped the spatula and ran to the window. In the yard, Jack was yelling something she couldn't make out, pointing toward the barn. Smoke was rising from the roof. Thick, black smoke. She didn't think. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside. The barn was burning. Flames licked up the wooden walls, and inside she could hear the horses screaming. Jack and Sam were already there, trying to get the doors open, but the heat drove them back. Caleb came running from the house, his face white. How many horses inside? 4, Jack yelled over the roar of the fire. And the milk cow. Get them out, now. He grabbed a bucket, doused himself with water from the trough, and ran into the smoke. Jack followed him. Evelyn stood frozen for half a second before she moved, filling buckets, passing them to Pete, who threw water on the flames. It was chaos. The heat was intense, and the smoke burned her eyes and lungs. She kept working, passing bucket after bucket, her arms screaming. Caleb emerged from the barn leading 2 panicked horses, their eyes rolling white. Jack came out behind him with the cow. They got the animals clear and went back in for the others. The roof groaned ominously. It's coming down, Pete yelled. Caleb and Jack appeared again, dragging the last horse between them. They'd barely cleared the doorway when the roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Flames shot up into the morning sky, and the heat pushed everyone back. They stood in the snow, breathing hard, watching the barn burn. Somebody set this, Sam said, his voice shaking. This wasn't no accident. Caleb didn't answer. His hands were blistered, his face black with soot. He just stood there, staring at the flames. His jaw clenched so tight, Evelyn thought his teeth might break. Then he turned and walked toward the house. Evelyn followed him inside. He went straight to the corner where he kept his gun cabinet and pulled out a Winchester. Started loading it with deliberate, controlled movements. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked. "What I should have done a week ago. You're going after them." "Damn right I am. That's exactly what they want. They're trying to provoke you into doing something stupid so they can claim self-defense." Caleb slammed a cartridge into the rifle. "They burned my barn, killed my cattle. They're not going to stop until I'm dead or gone, and I'm not planning on either." "So you're going to ride into town and get yourself shot?" "If that's what it takes." Evelyn stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the door. "Think about your sons." "I am thinking about them. I'm thinking that if I don't stop this now, Vance's men will keep coming until there's nothing left. I'm thinking that I'd rather die fighting than live as a coward who lets someone burn him out of his own home. There's a difference between courage and suicide." "Get out of my way! No!" They stood there, inches apart, both breathing hard. Evelyn could see the fury in his eyes, and under it, the fear. He was terrified, and anger was the only way he knew how to deal with it. "Please," she said quietly. "Don't do this. Not like this." "Then how?" "I don't know. But riding into town with a rifle isn't going to solve anything except getting you killed." The door opened behind them. Thomas stood there, his face pale. "Pa?" Caleb's expression cracked just for a second. Then he set the rifle down against the wall and walked past Evelyn without another word. He went out the back door, letting it slam behind him. Thomas looked at Evelyn. "Is he going to leave?" "No," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure. "He's just angry. The barn's gone." "I know. What are we going to do?" Evelyn took a breath, trying to steady herself. Her hands were still shaking. "We're going to clean up the mess, and then we're going to figure out what comes next." But as she said it, she wondered if there was a next. If Vance was willing to burn buildings, what would he be willing to do to people? Caleb stayed gone for most of the day. Evelyn kept herself busy, tending to Jack's burned hands, making sure the horses were settled in the lean-to they'd rigged up, cooking a meal nobody would eat. The boys stayed close to the house, unusually quiet. When Caleb finally came back, it was almost dark. He looked exhausted, his anger burned out, leaving only ash. "I talked to the hands," he said to Evelyn. "We're going to rebuild. Take a few weeks, but we can do it." "All right. And I'm going to the sheriff tomorrow. I know he's on Vance's payroll, but I'm going to make a report anyway. Get it on record." "That's good." He ran a hand over his face. "I'm sorry for earlier. You were right. I was about to do something stupid. You were scared. That an excuse?" "No, just a fact." She paused. "We're all scared." Caleb nodded slowly. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. "You could have run. When the barn was burning, you could have taken the boys and gotten clear." "So could you. I'm used to this kind of thing." "And you think I'm not?" Evelyn's voice was sharper than she intended. "You think I spent my whole life in drawing rooms and tea parlors? I grew up on a farm. I know what it's like when things go wrong. I know how to work and I know how to fight when I have to." Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or the beginning of it. "Good," he said quietly, "because I think we're going to need that." That night, Evelyn lay in her cot and listened to the house settling around her. She thought about the barn burning, about the look on Caleb's face when he'd loaded that rifle, about the boys upstairs trying to sleep despite the fear. She thought about spring, still months away, and she wondered if any of them would make it that far. The next morning, Caleb rode to town with Jack. They were gone for 4 hours. When they came back, Caleb's expression told her everything she needed to know. "Sheriff refused to take the report," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Said there was no evidence of arson. Suggested maybe I'd been careless with a lantern. That's absurd. That's Vance's money talking." Jack dismounted, shaking his head. "Whole town knows what's happening. Nobody's willing to say it out loud." "What about the marshal?" Evelyn asked. "Can you go over the sheriff's head?" "Marshal's in Helena. 3 days' ride if the weather holds. By the time he got here, Vance could burn the whole place down." Caleb pulled the saddle off his horse with sharp, angry movements. "We're on our own." That became the refrain over the next few weeks. We're on our own. They rebuilt the barn, or started to. It was slow work in the cold, with everyone watching their backs. The hired men took shifts at night, keeping watch. Caleb barely slept. Evelyn would see him standing at the window at 2 a.m, rifle in hand, staring out at the darkness. The boys stopped playing outside. They'd do their chores quick and scared, then retreat to the house. Thomas started following his father everywhere, a shadow. Levi had nightmares every night. Evelyn did what she could. She kept the house running, kept food on the table, kept the boys occupied. She read to them in the evenings, taught them their numbers and letters, told them stories about places far away where men didn't burn barns and threaten children. But the fear was always there, just under the surface. Then, one night in early March, everything changed. Evelyn woke to the sound of gunfire. She bolted upright, heart pounding. More shots, sharp cracks splitting the night air, shouting, the sound of horses. She grabbed her shawl and ran downstairs. Caleb was already at the window, rifle raised. "Stay back," he barked. "What's happening?" "They're here." Outside, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. The hired men were firing from the bunkhouse. Someone was shooting back, several someones by the sound of it. The boys appeared at the top of the stairs, their faces white with terror. "Get them away from the windows," Caleb ordered, not taking his eyes off the yard. Evelyn herded Thomas and Levi into the kitchen, away from the gunfire. They huddled together under the table, and she wrapped her arms around them both, feeling their small bodies shaking. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, knowing it was a lie but unable to stop herself. The shooting went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Caleb moved carefully to the door, rifle up. He waited, listened. Then a voice called out from the darkness. "That's just a warning, Boone. Next time we won't aim over your heads." Hoofbeats. Retreating. Caleb stayed at the window until the sound faded completely. Then he lowered his rifle and let out a long, shaky breath. Evelyn came out of the kitchen, the boys behind her. "Is anyone hurt?" "Don't know yet." He opened the door and called out, "Jack, Pete, Sam, we're good." Jack's voice came back from the bunkhouse. "Nobody hit." But the message was clear. Next time, someone would be. The morning after the shooting, nobody spoke much. They moved through breakfast like ghosts, forks scraping against plates in the heavy silence. Levi hadn't touched his food. Thomas sat rigid in his chair, staring at a knot in the table like it held answers. Caleb's face was drawn, the lines around his mouth deeper than they'd been a month ago. He looked like a man who'd stopped sleeping altogether. Jack came in through the back door, stamping snow off his boots. "Found the bullet holes. 20, maybe 30 rounds fired. Most went into the bunkhouse walls. Few hit the barn. What's left of it." "They weren't trying to kill anyone," Pete said from the doorway. "Not yet." "Not yet," Caleb echoed. He pushed his plate away, the food barely touched. "But they will. Vance is done playing." "So what do we do?" Sam asked. The young cowboy looked about ready to bolt, and Evelyn couldn't blame him. This wasn't what he'd signed up for when he took a job punching cattle. Caleb stood, walked to the window. The yard outside looked peaceful enough in the morning light, just snow and fence posts and the skeletal frame of the half-rebuilt barn. But Evelyn could feel the danger now, could taste it like copper in her mouth. "We fortify," Caleb said finally. "Board up the windows we don't need. Move supplies into the house, and we don't go anywhere alone. Not to the barn, not to the outhouse, nowhere." "That's prison," Thomas said quietly. Everyone looked at him. The boy's jaw was set, his eyes hard. He looked older than 9. "That's survival," Caleb corrected, "until we figure out our next move." "What next move?" Thomas's voice cracked. "They're going to keep coming until we're dead or gone. You said so yourself." "Thomas." "No." The boy stood up, his chair scraping back. "I'm not stupid. I know what's happening, and I know you're going to get yourself killed trying to fight them because you're too stubborn to leave. Watch your mouth." "Why? So I can be polite while they burn us out?" Thomas's eyes were wet now, but his voice stayed steady. "Ma's gone. You think I want to lose you too?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Caleb's face went white, then red. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might yell. But instead, he just closed his eyes and took a long breath through his nose. "Go upstairs," he said, his voice rough. "Both of you. Now." Thomas grabbed Levi's hand and pulled him toward the stairs. The younger boy was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. They disappeared upstairs, and a door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Jack cleared his throat. "Kid's not wrong." "I know that," Caleb snapped. "So what are we doing here, really?" Jack leaned against the doorframe, his weathered face serious. "I signed on to work cattle, not fight a war. Pete and Sam feel the same. We're loyal to you, Boone, but we got a right to know what we're fighting for, because right now it looks like we're all going to die over a piece of land." "It's not just land. I know what it is to you, but what is it to us?" Jack held up a hand before Caleb could respond. "I ain't saying we're leaving. I'm saying we need a plan that's more than wait for them to kill us." Caleb turned back to the window. His shoulders were tense, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Evelyn watched him struggle with it. The anger, the fear, the crushing weight of responsibility. "I'll ride to Helena," he said finally. "Get the marshal. Make him come back here and see what Vance is doing." "That's 3 days each way," Pete pointed out. "Maybe more if the weather turns." "You really think Vance is going to wait that long?" "You got a better idea?" Nobody answered. Evelyn stood up from the table, her decision made before she'd fully thought it through. "I'll go." Every head turned toward her. "What?" Caleb stared at her like she'd started speaking Chinese. "I'll ride to Helena. You need to stay here with your sons, with the ranch, but somebody needs to get the marshal, and it can't be one of your hired men because you need them here to defend the place." She crossed her arms, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I can ride. I know the way. And Vance's men won't be looking for a woman." "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because..." Caleb stopped, searching for words. "Because it's dangerous. Because you could freeze to death or get lost or all things that could happen to you too. Difference is, your sons need you here. They don't need me." "That's not true." Levi's voice came from the stairs. He was sitting on the top step, arms wrapped around his knees. "We do need you." Something in Evelyn's chest twisted painfully. She looked up at the boy, saw the fear in his face, and wanted to promise him she'd stay. But staying meant watching this family tear itself apart while they waited for violence to find them. "I'll come back," she said. "I promise." "You can't promise that." Thomas appeared next to his brother, his face sullen. "Nobody can." He was right, but Evelyn didn't say so. Caleb was shaking his head. "No, it's too dangerous. We'll figure something else out." "There is nothing else." Evelyn moved closer to him, lowering her voice so the boys wouldn't hear. "You know that. Every day we wait, Vance gets bolder. How long before they stop shooting over your heads? How long before one of those boys catches a bullet meant for you?" Caleb's jaw worked. She could see him calculating, weighing risks, hating every option in front of him. "If something happens to you, then you'll do exactly what you'd do if something happened to Jack, or Pete, or Sam. You'll survive. You'll take care of your sons, and you'll keep fighting." She held his gaze. "I'm not fragile, Caleb. I didn't survive this long by being fragile." He studied her face for a long moment. Then he cursed under his breath and turned away. "Fine. You leave at first light. Take the gray mare. She's the steadiest in cold weather. Jack will draw you a map and pack supplies." He paused. 3 days there, 3 days back. If you're not home in a week, I will be. If you're not, I'm coming after you." Something warm flickered in Evelyn's chest at the word home, but she pushed it aside. Fair enough. She spent the rest of the day preparing. Jack showed her the route. Follow the main road east, then north at the fork near Copper Creek. Stay away from the high passes where the snow drifted deep. Watch for markers. The marshal's office was on Main Street in Helena, across from the courthouse. Pete packed saddlebags with food, a bedroll, matches, and a knife. Sam checked the mare's shoes and tack, making sure everything was sound. Caleb gave her his spare revolver. "You know how to use this?" he asked, holding it out. "My father taught me." "It's loaded. 6 rounds. Don't waste them." Evelyn took the gun, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It had been years since she'd fired a weapon, but the mechanics came back quickly. "Check the cylinder. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Aim center mass. I won't, she said. That night she tried to sleep, but couldn't. Her mind kept running through everything that could go wrong. The weather could turn, the mare could go lame, she could get lost or attacked by wolves or caught by Vance's men who'd decide a witness was too dangerous to let live. Or she could make it to Helena and find the marshal didn't care any more than the sheriff did. Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs. The fire had burned down to embers, and the house was cold. She was adding wood when she heard footsteps behind her. Caleb stood in the doorway, wearing just his undershirt and trousers. He looked exhausted. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Not really. You?" "Haven't slept properly in weeks." He came into the room, sat down in one of the chairs near the fire. "Keep thinking if I close my eyes, I'll wake up to the house burning." Evelyn poked at the fire, watching sparks spiral up the chimney. "You can't stay awake forever." "I can try." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames catch and grow. The wind rattled the windows, but inside it was warm, almost peaceful. "My wife used to sit here," Caleb said suddenly. "After the boys went to bed, she'd read or sew or just stare at the fire. Said it was the only time she got to think her own thoughts." He paused. "I'd come down sometimes and find her crying. She never said why, but I knew. The loneliness got to her, the isolation. She was a town girl, used to neighbors and church socials and people around. This place, it wore her down." Evelyn didn't say anything, just listened. "When she got sick, she begged me to move, said the ranch was killing her, that the boys needed to grow up somewhere with schools and doctors and a future that wasn't just dirt and cattle." His voice dropped. "I told her she was being dramatic, that she'd feel better once she got her strength back. I kept saying we'd talk about it later after she recovered. But she didn't recover. No." He rubbed a hand over his face. "And now I'm doing the same damn thing with my sons. Holding on to this place because it's all I know how to do. Because letting go feels like admitting she was right and I was wrong." "Is that why you won't sell?" "Part of it. The other part is..." He stopped, searching for words. "This land is the only thing I've got to give them. My father worked himself to death building this ranch, and I've done the same keeping it alive. If I sell now, what was it all for? What did she die for?" Evelyn set down the poker and turned to face him. "She didn't die for the land, Caleb. She died because she got sick. That's not your fault." "Feels like it is." "I know, but feelings aren't facts." She moved closer, choosing her words carefully. "My mother spent the last 2 years of her life in bed, wasting away. And every day my father would come in and promise her tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow we'd have money for a doctor. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to save the farm. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow." Her throat tightened. She died waiting for tomorrow. And he died 6 months later, still fighting a fight he couldn't win. They're both gone, and the farm's gone too. So what was it all for? Caleb looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You think I should sell? I think you should do whatever keeps your sons alive, whether that's selling or fighting or running away in the middle of the night, because they're what matters. Not the land, not your pride. Them. And if they grow up thinking their father was a coward who ran, better than growing up without a father at all." The words hung between them, brutal and true. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. "I don't know how to do this. Any of it. I don't know how to be both parents. Don't know how to run the house and the ranch and keep everyone safe. Don't know how to make the right choices when every option feels wrong." "Nobody knows," Evelyn said quietly. "We're all just guessing and hoping we don't screw it up too badly." "You make it look easy." She almost laughed. "I'm terrified every single day. Terrified I'll fail those boys or say the wrong thing, or that one morning I'll wake up and you'll realize you made a mistake letting me stay." She paused. "But I show up anyway. That's all any of us can do." Caleb turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't the cold suspicion she'd seen that first night or the grudging respect that had grown over the weeks. It was something warmer, something that made her aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight played across his features, how tired and human he looked. "I didn't make a mistake," he said. "Letting you stay. That might be the one thing I got right." Before Evelyn could respond, a board creaked overhead. They both looked up, the moment broken. One of the boys, probably awake and scared. Caleb stood. "I should check on them." "Get some sleep," Evelyn said. "I'll keep the fire going." He hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful out there tomorrow." "I will." "And Evelyn?" He stopped in the doorway. "Come back." It wasn't a request. It was something deeper, a need he couldn't quite voice. "I will," she said again, meaning it with everything she had. The next morning came too fast. Evelyn was up before dawn, dressed in layers, her bag packed. The hired men were already in the yard, breath steaming in the cold air as they prepared the horse. The boys came down as she was pulling on her coat. Levi ran straight to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Don't go," he said, his voice muffled against her coat. "I have to, sweetheart." "But what if you don't come back?" Evelyn knelt down so she was eye level with him. "Then you'll be sad for a while. But you'll have your father and your brother, and you'll be okay. That's how these things work." "I don't want to be sad anymore," Levi whispered. "I'm tired of people leaving." Her heart broke a little. She pulled him close, feeling his small body trembling. "I know. Me too." Thomas stood apart, arms crossed, trying to look like he didn't care. But his eyes were red, and he kept glancing at the door like he was willing her not to go through it. Caleb came down the stairs, already dressed. He handed her a folded piece of paper. "That's a letter for the marshal. Explains everything. He knows me. We served together in the war. Tell him I'm calling in the favor he owes me." Evelyn tucked the letter into her coat pocket. "I will. And take this." He held out a pocket watch, worn silver with initials engraved on the back. "It was my father's. Keep track of time. Don't ride after dark if you can help it." She took the watch, understanding what he wasn't saying. It was valuable. Probably the most valuable thing he owned besides the land. He was trusting her with it, trusting her to come back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Outside, the mare was saddled and ready. Jack double-checked the cinch while Pete handed her the reins. "Stay on the main road," Jack reminded her. "You see riders? You hide. Don't take chances." "I won't." She swung up into the saddle, settling her weight. The horse shifted beneath her, eager to move. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky, turning the snow pink and gold. Caleb stood in the yard, his hands shoved in his pockets, his breath clouding in the cold air. Behind him, the boys huddled in the doorway. 6 days, he said. 6 days, she agreed. Then she turned the mare's head east and rode out of the yard. She didn't look back. If she had, she might not have been able to leave. The first day was hard riding. The cold bit through her layers, and the wind kept trying to push her off course. But the mare was steady, and the road was clear enough to follow. She passed a few homesteads, smoke rising from chimneys, but she didn't stop. Couldn't afford to waste time. By nightfall, she'd covered maybe 20 miles. She made camp in a stand of trees, built a small fire, and ate cold beans straight from the can. The darkness pressed in around her, full of sounds, wind, animals, the creak of branches. She kept the revolver close and tried not to think about how alone she was. The second day was worse. The temperature dropped, and snow started falling around noon. Not a blizzard, but enough to make visibility poor. She kept the mare moving, following the road by feel as much as sight. Her hands went numb inside her gloves, and her face ached from the cold. She thought about Caleb and the boys, wondered if they were safe, if Vance's men had come back, if she'd made a mistake leaving them when they needed protection most. But what choice did she have? Staying meant waiting for the inevitable. At least this way she was doing something. By the third day, the snow had stopped, but the cold had deepened. Every breath hurt. The mare was tired, her pace slowing. Evelyn kept her moving, talking to her, promising rest soon. Helena appeared in the distance just before sunset, a sprawl of buildings against the white landscape. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys. The sight of it made her want to cry with relief. She rode into town as the light was fading, drawing stares from the few people still on the street. She found the marshal's office right where Jack had said it would be, a solid brick building with a sign that read U.S. Marshal in faded paint. Evelyn dismounted stiffly, her legs barely holding her. She tied the mare to the hitching post and pushed open the door. Inside, a man sat behind a desk, reading a newspaper by lamplight. He was in his 50s, gray-bearded, with sharp eyes that took her in immediately. "Help you, miss?" Evelyn pulled out the letter with numb fingers and set it on his desk. "I need to see Marshall Garrett. It's urgent." The man set down his paper. "You're looking at him." Relief flooded through her. "I'm Evelyn Carter. I work for Caleb Boone. He sent me to Boone?" The marshal's expression changed, grew serious. "What happened?" "Everything." She sank into a chair uninvited, too tired to care about manners. "Read the letter, but the short version is a railroad man named Vance is trying to force him off his land. He's killed cattle, burned the barn, and shot up the ranch. The local sheriff won't help because he's on Vance's payroll. Mr. Boone is asking you to come back with me and do something before his sons end up dead." Marshall Garrett opened the letter, his eyes scanning quickly. His jaw tightened as he read. "How long ago did you leave?" he asked, without looking up. 3 days. "Anyone follow you?" "I don't think so. I was careful." He finished the letter, folded it carefully, and set it aside. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw recognition dawn. "You're the school teacher, the one they ran out." "Yes." "And now you're working for Boone." "I'm helping with his sons, keeping the house." She lifted her chin. "And before you ask, no, it's not like that. It's just work, that's all." The marshal's expression didn't change. "I wasn't going to ask. What you do isn't my business, but Vance is." He stood, moving to a map on the wall. "I've heard rumors about what he's been doing out there. Land grabs, intimidation. But I haven't had proof, and folks haven't been willing to testify. Will you come?" "I'll leave at first light, but miss..." He turned to face her. "You need to understand something. Even if I go out there, even if I see evidence of what Vance is doing, that doesn't mean I can stop it. He's got money, and lawyers, and friends in territorial government. Best I can do is slow him down." That might be enough. Might be. Might not. He pulled his coat off a hook. "There's a boarding house down the street. Get yourself a room and some hot food. We ride at dawn." Evelyn stood, swaying slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This could go bad in a lot of ways." She knew that. Had known it since the moment she'd offered to make this ride. But at least now she'd done something. At least now there was a chance. That night, in a narrow bed in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and old wood, Evelyn lay awake and counted the hours until dawn. She thought about the ride back, 3 more days if the weather held. She thought about what she'd find when she got there. She thought about Caleb standing in the yard, his hands in his pockets, telling her to come back. She thought about how somewhere along the way, that ranch had stopped being just a place to survive the winter. It had become something more, something that felt dangerously close to what she'd been running from her whole life. It felt like home, and that terrified her almost as much as the thought of Vance's men breaking down the door. But fear or not, she'd made a promise. She'd come back. She'd bring help. And whatever came after that, well, they'd face it together. All of them. The marshal kept his word. They left at dawn, riding hard. He didn't talk much, just pushed forward with the kind of determination that came from years of hunting bad men across bad country. Evelyn matched his pace, ignoring the ache in her muscles, the cold that seemed to have settled permanently in her bones. On the second day out from Helena, they ran into trouble. They'd just crossed the fork at Copper Creek when Marshall Garrett pulled up short, his hand going to his rifle. "Riders," he said quietly. "Coming fast." Evelyn saw them a moment later, 3 men on horseback moving at a gallop. Her stomach dropped. "Vance's men?" she asked. "Maybe. Get behind me." The riders closed the distance quickly. They pulled up about 20 yards away. The same 3 men who'd threatened Caleb in the yard weeks ago. The bearded leader smiled when he saw Evelyn. "Well now," he said, "look who went and got herself a marshal. That was clever, schoolteacher." Marshal Garrett's voice was flat and hard. "You boys got business out here?" "Just checking the road. Mr. Vance likes to know who's traveling through his territory." "This isn't his territory. It's open land." "For now." The bearded man's smile widened. "But things change. Maybe you should ride back to Helena, Marshal. Forget about whatever that woman told you. This ain't federal business." "I'll decide what's federal business." "Suit yourself." But you keep riding that direction, you might run into trouble. Roads are dangerous this time of year. Folks get lost, fall through ice. All kinds of accidents can happen. That a threat? Just friendly advice. The two groups stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Evelyn's hand moved slowly toward the revolver in her coat pocket. If shooting started, she wasn't going down without a fight. Then Marshal Garrett said something that surprised her. "Tell Vance I'm coming. Tell him I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon and I'll be bringing questions. If he's got answers, he better have them ready." The bearded man's smile faded slightly. "You're making a mistake." "Probably. I've made bigger ones." The marshal jerked his head. "Now get out of our way." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the bearded man wheeled his horse around, and the other two followed. They rode off at a gallop, disappearing over a rise. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "They're going to warn Vance we're coming." "Good. Let him sweat." Marshal Garrett urged his horse forward. "Come on, we're losing daylight." They rode hard for the rest of the day. The temperature dropped as the sun set, and by the time they stopped to make camp, Evelyn was shaking with cold and exhaustion. But they were close now, maybe 8 hours from the ranch. Close enough that she started imagining what she'd find when they got there. "Please," she thought, "please let them be okay." They reached the ranch just after noon on the 6th day. Evelyn saw the smoke from the chimney first and felt something unclench in her chest. The house was still standing. That had to mean something. But as they rode closer, she saw the damage. New bullet holes pocked the walls of the bunkhouse. The windows on the north side of the main house had been boarded up, and the yard was empty. No one working, no movement except for a lone figure standing watch on the porch with a rifle. Jack. He lowered the gun when he recognized them, but his face stayed grim. "About damn time," he called out. "We were starting to think you weren't coming back." Evelyn dismounted, her legs stiff. "What happened?" "They came back. Night before last. More of them this time, 7, maybe 8. Tried to burn us out again, but we were ready. Drove them off, but Sam took a bullet in the shoulder." Jack's expression darkened. "He'll live, but it was close." Marshal Garrett swung down from his horse, his jaw tight. "Anyone else hurt?" "Pete's got a graze across his ribs, nothing serious, but the boys—" Jack stopped, glanced at Evelyn. "They're pretty shaken up." "Where's Caleb?" Evelyn asked, already moving toward the house. "Inside. He hasn't slept since you left. Just stands at that window with his rifle, waiting for them to come back." She pushed through the door, and the first thing she saw was Levi sitting on the bottom stair, his face pale and drawn. When he saw her, he jumped up and ran straight into her arms. "You came back," he said, his voice muffled against her coat. "You came back. I told you I would." She held him tight, feeling how thin he'd gotten in just 6 days. "Where's your brother?" "Upstairs. He won't come down." "Won't talk to nobody." Caleb appeared from the kitchen, and Evelyn's breath caught. He looked like hell, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. His clothes rumpled like he'd been sleeping in them. But when he saw her, something in his face changed. Relief, raw and unconcealed. "You made it," he said. "I brought the marshal." Garrett came through the door behind her, and Caleb straightened, some of the exhaustion dropping away as he extended his hand. "Garrett, been a long time." "Too long." The marshal shook his hand firmly. "Wish it was under better circumstances. Jack filled me in. This is worse than I thought." "It's going to get worse before it gets better. Vance isn't stopping." Caleb's voice was flat, matter of fact. "His men told us the next time they come, they're coming to finish it." "When?" "Don't know. Could be tonight, could be next week, but they're coming." Marshal Garrett pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. "All right, let's talk about what we're dealing with here. How many men does Vance have?" 10, maybe 15? Hard to say for sure. The ones hitting us rotate, but there's always the same core group. That big bastard with the beard runs them. "Clayton. Yeah, I know him. He's got warrants in 3 territories for armed robbery and assault. If I can catch him in the act, I can haul him in." "Big if," Jack muttered from the doorway. "I know." Garrett pulled out a notebook. "But it's a start. Here's what's going to happen. I'm staying here until this gets resolved, one way or another. In the meantime, I need statements from everyone who's witnessed what Vance's men have done. I need evidence, bullets, spent casings, anything that proves they've been attacking this ranch. Caleb nodded slowly. And then what? You arrest Vance? If I can prove he's behind it, yes. But Vance is smart. He keeps his hands clean, lets his men do the dirty work. What I need is one of them to turn on him, to testify that he gave the orders. Good luck with that. Those men are loyal. Everyone's loyal until they're facing a noose. Garrett leaned back in his chair. We play this right. We can turn this around. But Boone, you need to understand something. This might not end clean. Vance has lawyers and money. Even if I arrest him, he might walk. Then what's the point? Caleb's voice was bitter. The point is we make him pay for what he's done. Maybe not everything, but something. And we do it legal so your sons don't grow up thinking the only way to solve problems is with a gun. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Caleb nodded. All right, we do it your way, for now. That's all I'm asking. Evelyn left them to it and went upstairs to check on Thomas. She found him in his room, sitting on the bed with his back against the wall, staring at nothing. Your brother's worried about you, she said from the doorway. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Thomas didn't answer. His jaw was set the same way his father's got when he was trying not to show how scared he was. Evelyn came into the room and sat down on the edge of the bed, leaving space between them. You want to talk about what happened? No. Fair enough. She waited, giving him time. Sometimes silence worked better than questions. Finally, Thomas said, I thought they were going to kill Pa. But they didn't. They tried. They shot at him. I saw it through the window. He was in the yard and they were shooting, and I couldn't do anything. I just stood there. His voice cracked. I just stood there like a coward. Thomas, don't tell me I'm not a coward. I know what I am. He pulled his knees up to his chest. Ma died and I couldn't stop it. Now they're trying to kill Pa and I still can't stop it. What kind of man am I going to be if I can't protect my own family? Evelyn's heart ached for him. He was 9 years old, carrying the weight of a grown man on his narrow shoulders. You're not supposed to protect your family, she said quietly. That's your father's job. Your job is to be a kid, to grow up and learn and make mistakes and figure out who you want to be. That's it. But no buts. You think your father wants you out there with a rifle, trying to fight grown men? You think that's what would make him proud? She shifted closer. What makes him proud is that you're still here. Still getting up every morning, still taking care of your brother, still being brave even when you're scared to death. That's what matters. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a very small voice, he said, I don't want him to die. Neither do I, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure he doesn't. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure it out, together. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. He didn't. She put her hand on his shoulder, and after a moment he leaned against her, just slightly. They sat like that for a while, listening to the muffled voices from downstairs. Then Thomas said, You really came back. Of course I did. Why? You could have just stayed in Helena. Would have been safer. Evelyn thought about how to answer that. She could tell him it was duty, or honor, or because she'd given her word. All of those things were true, but they weren't the whole truth. Because this is my home now, she said finally, and you don't abandon your home just because things get hard. Thomas looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. Even if you might die? Even then. He nodded, like that made sense to him. Maybe it did. Maybe at 9 years old, living on the edge of violence, that was the only kind of sense there was. That night, Marshal Garrett laid out a plan. They'd set watches and shifts, 2 men awake at all times, one covering each approach to the house. If Vance's men came back, they'd be ready. And this time, with a federal marshal present, any violence would be documented, witnessed, and prosecuted. This only works if we stay disciplined, Garrett said, looking around at the assembled group. Caleb, Jack, Pete, Sam, with his arm in a sling, and Evelyn. No shooting unless they fire first. We need them to be the aggressors. Understood? Everyone nodded. Good. Now, I'm going to need statements from each of you. Everything you've seen, everything they've said. Dates, times, details. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case. They spent the next few hours going over everything: the threats, the dead cattle, the burned barn, the shooting. Garrett wrote it all down in his careful, precise handwriting. When he got to Sam's account of being shot, the young cowboy's voice shook. I was just standing there, checking the fence line. Didn't even hear them coming until the shot hit me. Felt like someone punched me in the shoulder, you know? Didn't hurt at first, then it hurt like hell. You see who shot you? Garrett asked. Big guy with a beard, same one who's been leading them. Clayton. Good. That's assault with a deadly weapon. Federal crime. Garrett made a note. Anyone else see it? I did, Pete said. I was 20 yards away, saw him aim, saw him fire, clear as day. Even better, 2 witnesses. Garrett looked satisfied. We're building a case here. Keep this up, and we'll have enough to put Clayton away for 10 years. But Caleb didn't look satisfied. He looked like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Evelyn understood. Evidence and testimony were all well and good, but they didn't stop bullets. They didn't keep a family safe when armed men came in the night. All the legal proceedings in the world wouldn't matter if they were dead. She found Caleb on the porch later that night, staring out at the darkness. The temperature had dropped again, and his breath fogged in the air. You should be sleeping, she said, coming to stand beside him. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming over that ridge. He gestured toward the north. 7 of them, riding hard, guns blazing. We held them off, but barely. If they come with more men next time, the marshal's here now. 1 marshal. Against how many? Vance could bring 20 men if he wanted. 30? What's Garrett going to do? Arrest them all? Caleb's laugh was harsh. This was a mistake. I should have sent you away when I had the chance. Sent the boys somewhere safe. Where? There's nowhere safe. Anywhere safer than here. Evelyn turned to face him. You're not thinking straight. You're exhausted and scared, and you're second-guessing everything. But listen to me. You made the right call. Fighting back is better than running. At least this way, you've got a chance. A chance to what? Get my sons killed? A chance to show them what it means to stand up for what's yours. A chance to teach them that some things are worth fighting for. She paused. And a chance to beat Vance at his own game. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What if we lose? Then we lose. But at least we went down fighting. He looked at her, and even in the dim light from the window, she could see the exhaustion and fear and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. When did you get so damn brave? He asked quietly. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of running. Could have fooled me. You rode to Helena alone in the middle of winter, brought back a marshal, came back here knowing what you were walking into. He shook his head. That's brave in my book. Or stupid. Maybe both. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But I'm glad you did it. Glad you came back. Where else would I go? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Where else would she go? She had no family, no home, no place that wanted her. This ranch, this house, these people, they were all she had. And somewhere along the way it had stopped being just survival and started being something more. Caleb reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from work, and warm despite the cold. He didn't say anything, just held her hand like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. We should go inside, Evelyn said softly. It's freezing out here. But neither of them moved. They stood there on the porch, hands clasped, staring out at the darkness and the threat it held. And for just a moment, Evelyn let herself imagine what it would be like if things were different. If there was no Vance, no violence, no fear. If it was just them, a man and a woman building a life together, raising boys, working land. If it was real, and not just desperation dressed up as something more. But then the moment passed and reality crashed back in. Caleb released her hand and stepped back, the distance between them suddenly deliberate. Get some sleep, he said, his voice rough. I'll take first watch. Caleb, please, just get some sleep. She wanted to argue, wanted to push back against whatever wall he was throwing up between them, but she could see the exhaustion in every line of his body, could hear the edge of something breaking in his voice. So she nodded and went inside, leaving him alone in the cold. The attack came 2 nights later. Evelyn woke to gunfire and Thomas shouting. She bolted out of bed, grabbed the revolver Caleb had given her, and ran downstairs. The house was dark except for muzzle flashes outside the windows. Get down! Caleb yelled from his position by the front window. He fired twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Evelyn dropped to the floor, her heart hammering. Where are the boys? Kitchen. Stay with them. She crawled toward the kitchen, keeping low. More gunfire erupted from the bunkhouse, Jack and Pete returning fire. Glass shattered somewhere upstairs. In the kitchen, she found both boys huddled under the table, Levi crying silently, Thomas with his arms around his brother. They looked terrified. It's okay, Evelyn said, knowing it was a lie but saying it anyway. It's going to be okay. They're going to kill us, Thomas said, his voice flat. No, they're not. You don't know that. He was right. She didn't. More shots rang out. Someone was shouting. She couldn't make out the words over the noise. Then Marshal Garrett's voice cut through, loud and authoritative. This is a federal marshal. You're all under arrest. Drop your weapons. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed was eerie, broken only by the sound of horses moving in the yard. Evelyn risked a look out the window. In the pale moonlight, she could see riders, maybe 8 or 9 of them, spread out around the house. Clayton sat his horse in the center, his bearded face split in a grin. Marshal Garrett, he called out. Fancy meeting you out here? You lost? You're shooting at civilians, Clayton. That's assault, attempted murder. I've got a dozen charges I can level at you right now. We were just checking on our friend Mr. Boone, making sure he and his family are safe. Dangerous times, you know. A lot of outlaws in these parts. Save it. I've got witnesses who will testify you fired first. Clayton laughed. Witnesses? You mean Boone and his hired hands? That's not going to hold up in court, Marshal. Just one man's word against another. What about mine? Garrett stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. I saw you fire at this house. Saw your men shoot at unarmed civilians. That enough for you? The grin faded from Clayton's face. You're bluffing. Try me. Right away now and I'll settle for arresting you. Keep this up and I'll add murder of a federal officer to the list. For a long moment nobody moved. Then one of Clayton's men spoke up, his voice nervous. Boss, maybe we should… Shut up. Clayton's eyes stayed fixed on Garrett. You're making a mistake, Marshal. Mr. Vance isn't going to like you interfering with his business. Then Mr. Vance can come talk to me about it. In court. Clayton spat into the snow. This isn't over. No, Garrett agreed. It's not. But tonight is. Get off this property. Now. For another long, tense moment, Clayton didn't move. Then he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. They didn't hurry, didn't run, just rode away like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. They could come back tomorrow, or next week, or next month. And unless Garrett could prove Vance had ordered the attacks, there was nothing to stop them. Evelyn came out of the kitchen, the boys behind her. Caleb lowered his rifle slowly, his hands shaking. Everyone all right? He asked. We're fine, Jack called from the bunkhouse. No new holes. Sam? Still breathing. Wish I wasn't, but I am. Caleb turned to Garrett. That did nothing. You know that, right? They'll be back. Maybe. But now I've got a dozen eyewitnesses who saw them attack. That's leverage. Garrett reloaded his rifle. And I'm going to use it. But even as he said it, Evelyn could see the doubt in his face. They all knew the truth. Vance had money, power, connections. Clayton and his men would be back, and next time a federal marshal standing in their way might not be enough to stop them. They spent the rest of the night on edge, waiting for another attack that didn't come. By the time the sun rose, everyone was exhausted and jumpy. Sam's wound had reopened from the stress, and Pete was nursing a gash on his arm from flying glass. Caleb looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. This has to end, he said to Garrett over breakfast. I can't keep living like this, can't keep putting my sons through this. I know, and I'm working on it. Garrett pushed his plate away. I'm riding into town this morning, going to have a conversation with Vance myself. Maybe I can reason with him. Reason with him? Caleb's laugh was bitter. The man's trying to kill us. You think he's going to sit down and have a polite chat? I think he's a businessman who doesn't want federal attention. If I make it clear that attacking you means attacking me, that might give him pause. And if it doesn't, Garrett met his eyes. Then we escalate. I call in more marshals. We make this a federal case. We do whatever it takes. Evelyn listened to this exchange and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Whatever it takes. Those were dangerous words, the kind of words that led to people dying. After Garrett left for town, the ranch fell into an uneasy quiet. Jack and Pete worked on repairing the damage from the night before. Sam rested in the bunkhouse, pale and feverish. The boys stayed inside, too scared to play. Caleb stood at the window, watching the road. "You should eat something," Evelyn said, coming to stand beside him. "Not hungry. You need to keep your strength up." "For what?" "So I can watch my sons grow up terrified? So I can keep fighting a fight I can't win?" His voice was raw. "This was a mistake. All of it. I should have sold when I had the chance." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" He turned to look at her, and she saw the defeat in his eyes. "What am I fighting for, Evelyn? A piece of land? Some idea of honor? It's not worth it. Nothing's worth this. Your sons are worth it. Their future is worth it." "What future?" "They're going to grow up orphans because their father was too stubborn to walk away." Evelyn grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. You're exhausted and scared, and you're saying things you don't mean. But you can't give up now, not when we're this close." "Close to what? Getting killed?" "Close to winning." She held his gaze. "Garrett's right. Vance is a businessman. He operates on profit and loss. If we make this too expensive for him, if we make it clear he's going to have to kill a federal marshal to get this land, he'll back off. He has to." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it. And you need to believe it too." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, some of the defeat left his face. Not all of it. He was still scared, still exhausted, but enough that she could see him finding his footing again. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "Do what?" "Make me believe things might actually work out. Because somebody has to." He almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess somebody does." They stood there together, looking out at the empty road, waiting for Garrett to come back, waiting to see if reason would work, or if they'd have to prepare for another fight. Either way, they'd face it together. That much, at least, Evelyn was sure of. Marshal Garrett came back 3 hours later, and Evelyn knew from his face that the conversation hadn't gone well. "Vance refused to see me," Garrett said, swinging down from his horse. His jaw was tight with anger. "His foreman told me Mr. Vance doesn't conduct business with government officials without his lawyers present. Said if I wanted to make accusations, I should put them in writing and send them through proper channels." "Which means what?" Caleb asked. "Which means he's lawyering up, playing it safe, making sure everything he does from here on out has plausible deniability." Garrett pulled off his gloves with sharp, frustrated movements. "But I talked to some folks in town, got some interesting information." "Like what?" "Like Vance has been doing this all over the territory. 6 ranches in the past 2 years, same pattern every time. Intimidation, vandalism, violence. Forces people to sell cheap, then flips the land to the railroad for 10 times what he paid." Garrett's expression was grim. "And in 3 of those cases, someone ended up dead. Always ruled an accident or self-defense. Always just convenient enough that nobody could prove otherwise." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "So what are you saying?" Evelyn asked. "That he's going to kill us and get away with it?" "I'm saying he's good at making problems disappear. But here's the thing. Those other ranchers were alone. They didn't have witnesses, didn't have a federal marshal camped on their property, didn't have documentation." Garrett pulled out his notebook. "We do, and that changes everything." "Does it?" Caleb's voice was hollow. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like all we've done is paint a bigger target on our backs." "Maybe. But now Vance knows he can't just burn you out quietly. Any move he makes from here on out, I'm watching. And I'm not the only one." Garrett looked satisfied. "I sent a telegram to Helena before I left town. Requested backup. 2 more marshals should be here by end of week." That got everyone's attention. 3 marshals, Jack said slowly. "That might actually make Vance think twice." "That's the idea. Make it too risky, too public, too expensive. Force him to either back off or negotiate." "And if he doesn't?" Caleb asked. Garrett met his eyes. "Then we arrest him for conspiracy to commit murder, and we let a jury decide." It sounded good, logical. Like maybe there was actually a path forward that didn't end in blood. But Evelyn had learned a long time ago that things that sounded too good usually were. The next 2 days passed in tense quiet. Everyone stayed alert, watching the horizon for riders that didn't come. The boys started venturing outside again, though they never went far from the house. Sam's fever broke, and he started moving around, his arm still in a sling but his color better. Caleb didn't relax. If anything, he got more tense, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Something's wrong," he said to Evelyn on the third day. They were in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the boys did their lessons at the table. "It's too quiet. Maybe Garrett's plan is working. Maybe Vance is backing off. Or maybe he's planning something worse." Caleb kept glancing at the window. "I know men like him. They don't give up. They don't back down. They just get smarter about how they come at you." He was probably right, but what else could they do except wait? The answer came that night. Evelyn was washing dishes when she heard hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed a towel to dry her hands, but before she could move, Caleb was already at the door, rifle in hand. "Everyone stay inside," he ordered. But when he looked out the window, his expression changed from wariness to confusion. "It's not Vance's men," he said. Evelyn came to look. In the yard, a group of riders had pulled up, maybe a dozen men, all armed, all looking serious. But these weren't Clayton's crew. These were ranchers, men Evelyn recognized from town. Weathered faces, work-worn hands, the kind of men who spent their lives fighting dirt and weather and prices that never seemed fair. Marshal Garrett stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead rider, a grizzled man in his 50s with a scar across his cheek, dismounted. "Name's Walter Hayes. I own the spread about 8 miles east. Heard you were having trouble with Vance. News travels fast. News like this does. Vance tried the same thing with me 2 years back. Killed half my herd, burned my barn, threatened my family. I ended up selling for a fraction of what the land was worth because I couldn't afford to keep fighting." Hayes's expression was hard. "I'm not the only one. Every man here has a story like that. We all got pushed off our land or paid off cheap because Vance made our lives hell." Garrett came down the steps slowly. "And you're here because we're tired of it. Tired of watching our neighbors get run off. Tired of letting that bastard take what he wants without consequences." Hayes looked past Garrett to where Caleb stood in the doorway. "We heard you're making a stand, Boone. Figured it's time we did the same." Caleb came out onto the porch, Evelyn behind him. "What are you proposing?" "Safety in numbers. Vance comes at you again. He's not just fighting one ranch. He's fighting all of us. We take shifts, we keep watch, and we make it clear that attacking you means attacking the whole territory." "That's dangerous," Garrett warned. "You could all end up dead." "Could be. But doing nothing's just as dangerous. My son's 15. He's got his whole life ahead of him. I don't want him growing up in a place where men like Vance can do whatever they want without anyone standing up." Hayes looked around at the other ranchers, and they all nodded. "We're done being pushed around. This ends now." For the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered across Caleb's face. He came down the steps and extended his hand to Hayes. "Thank you," he said simply. Hayes gripped his hand firmly. "Don't thank me yet. This could still go bad." "I know, but at least we've got a fighting chance." The ranchers set up a perimeter around the property. Men posted at intervals, keeping watch in shifts. They brought supplies, extra ammunition, and a determination that felt almost like momentum. For the first time since this whole thing started, Evelyn felt like maybe they weren't completely alone. That night, she found Caleb standing in the yard, looking up at the stars. The temperature had dropped, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. "You should be sleeping," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Could say the same to you." "I don't sleep much these days." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Too much on my mind." "Yeah, me too." They stood in silence for a moment, breath fogging in the cold air. Around them, she could see the shapes of the ranchers on watch, dark figures against the snow, keeping vigil. "I never expected this," Caleb said finally. "Never thought anyone would stand with me. Most of the territory thinks I'm a fool for not selling." They thought that before. Now they're thinking different. "Because of you." Evelyn looked at him in surprise. "What?" "You rode to Helena, brought back Garrett, refused to give up when any sane person would have run, He turned to face her. You made people see this wasn't just about one stubborn rancher. It was about all of us. About whether we're going to let men like Vance take whatever they want. I just did what needed doing. No, you did more than that. His voice was quiet, intense. You gave me something I didn't have before. Hope. And I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't have to thank me. I want to. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. When this is over, if we survive this, I want to ask you something, but I can't ask it now. Not when everything's uncertain. Not when I don't know if we'll still be standing when the dust settles. Evelyn's heart was hammering. She knew what he was saying without him saying it. Could feel it in the way he held her hand, the way he looked at her. Ask me now, she said softly. No, when this is done. When I can offer you something besides danger and fear and a life that might end tomorrow. He squeezed her hand gently. You deserve better than a desperate man's desperate proposal. Caleb, please, let me do this right. Just this once. Let me do something right. So she nodded, swallowing past the lump in her throat. All right, when this is over. When this is over, he released her hand and they stood there under the stars, not touching but connected by something stronger than touch, by choice, by shared danger, by the understanding that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The confrontation came 2 days later, just after dawn. Evelyn was making breakfast when she heard the shout from outside. She dropped the spoon and ran to the window. Her blood went cold. Vance's men were coming, not just Clayton's crew, but what looked like 20 or 30 riders, all armed, moving toward the ranch in a long line. They weren't trying to hide, weren't sneaking in under cover of darkness. They were riding in bold as brass, like they owned the place, because they thought they did. Everyone inside! Garrett yelled. Now! The ranchers who'd been on watch came running for the house. Caleb grabbed his rifle, and Jack started barricading the door. Evelyn herded the boys upstairs, her heart pounding. Stay away from the windows, she told them. Get under the bed and stay there no matter what you hear. Evelyn, Thomas started. Do it, now. They scrambled under the bed, and she could hear Levi crying softly. Every instinct screamed at her to stay with them, to protect them. But she thought about what Caleb had said, about hope, about standing together, about refusing to let men like Vance take what wasn't theirs. She went back downstairs. In the main room, Garrett was positioning men at the windows. The ranchers had their rifles ready, their faces grim but determined. Caleb stood by the door, and when he saw her, his expression went hard. Get upstairs with the boys. No. Evelyn, I can shoot. You need every gun you have. She pulled out the revolver he'd given her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm not hiding. For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded once, sharp. Windows on the east side. Don't waste ammunition. Only shoot if you have a clear target. She took her position, checking the revolver's chamber. 6 shots. She'd have to make them count. Outside, the riders had stopped about 50 yards from the house. They sat their horses in a long line, weapons visible. It was meant to intimidate, to show overwhelming force, and it was working. Even with a dozen armed men in the house, they were outnumbered 2 to 1. A single rider came forward. Not Clayton this time, someone else. A man in an expensive coat and hat, sitting a black horse like he was posing for a portrait. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see he was used to getting his way. Vance. Marshal Garrett stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. That's close enough. Vance pulled up about 20 yards from the house. Marshal Garrett, I heard you were causing trouble out here. Thought I'd come see for myself. I'm not causing trouble. I'm preventing it. You're the one who keeps sending armed men to attack this ranch. Attack? Vance spread his hands in mock innocence. I've done no such thing. If Mr. Boone has been having difficulties with outlaws, that's unfortunate. But it has nothing to do with me. Save it. I've got sworn statements from a dozen witnesses. I've got evidence. And I've got enough to charge you with conspiracy to commit murder. Do you? Vance smiled. Because all I see is one marshal and a bunch of desperate men who are in over their heads. You really think you can make charges stick? I've got lawyers in 3 states. I've got friends in the territorial government, and I've got enough money to tie this up in court for the next 10 years. His smile widened. Meanwhile, what do you have? A ranch that's falling apart, a family that's terrified, and neighbors who are only here because they're too stupid to see they're on the losing side. We're not on the losing side, Caleb's voice came from inside the house, loud and clear. We're on the right side. There's a difference. Vance laughed. The right side doesn't pay the bills, Boone. The right side doesn't keep your sons fed and warm. The right side doesn't matter when you're dead. Maybe not, but I'll die standing before I live on my knees. How noble and how pointless. Vance's expression hardened. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ride away now. I'm going to give you 24 hours to reconsider. And then, one way or another, this land becomes mine. You can sell it and walk away with something, or you can keep fighting and end up with nothing. Your choice. Not much of a choice, Garrett said. It's the only one you're getting. Vance turned his horse. 24 hours, Boone. Think about your sons. Think about what kind of future you're giving them. A dead father and a burned ranch? Or a chance to start over somewhere else? He rode back to his men, and the whole group wheeled around and departed, slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. The silence they left behind was suffocating. Evelyn came downstairs, her legs shaking. Around her, the ranchers were talking in low, urgent voices. Some looked scared, some looked angry. All of them looked like they were reconsidering whether this fight was worth dying for. Hayes spoke up. He's bluffing. Has to be. He wouldn't risk open warfare, not with a federal marshal watching. Unless he thinks he can get away with it, another rancher said. Man's got that kind of money, that kind of power. Maybe he can. So what do we do? Someone asked. Stand and fight or cut our losses? The room erupted in argument. Evelyn tuned it out, watching Caleb. He stood by the window, his face unreadable, his rifle still in his hands. Finally, he turned to face the room. Anyone who wants to leave, I understand. You've got families, you've got land of your own to protect. I won't hold it against you. Nobody moved. But I'm not leaving, and I'm not selling. Whatever Vance brings tomorrow, I'll be here. His voice was steady, certain. Because my sons are watching. And I won't teach them that running is the answer. I won't teach them that might makes right or that money beats principle. I'll teach them that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad. Hayes cleared his throat. You're going to get yourself killed, Boone. Probably, but I'll go down fighting. Well then. Hayes checked his rifle. Guess we all will. One by one, the other ranchers nodded. They were scared. Evelyn could see it in their faces. But they were staying, not because they were fearless, but because sometimes courage was just showing up even when you wanted to run. That night, they prepared. Extra ammunition distributed. Watch rotations set. Escape routes planned in case things went completely wrong. Marshal Garrett sent another telegram calling for more backup, but they all knew help wouldn't arrive in time. Tomorrow, they were on their own. Evelyn found Caleb in the boys' room, sitting on the edge of Thomas's bed. Both boys were awake, their eyes wide in the lamplight. Pa? Levi's voice was small. Are we going to die tomorrow? I don't know, son. I hope not. But you're going to fight. Yes. Why? Thomas asked. Why can't we just leave, go somewhere else? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You know why your grandfather built this ranch. Because he wanted to build something that would last. Something he could pass down to his son, and his son could pass down to his sons. He wanted to create a legacy. He looked at his boys. This ranch is your legacy. It's your future. And I won't let some man take it just because he's got more money and more guns. But if you die, then you'll have this land, and you'll know your father died defending it, defending you. His voice caught. I know it's not fair. I know it's not what you signed up for. But life's not fair, and sometimes the only thing you can do is stand your ground and fight for what's yours. Thomas's jaw was set, trying not to cry. I don't want you to die. I don't want to die either. I'm scared to death if I'm being honest. Caleb pulled both boys close. But I'm more scared of teaching you to run, of showing you that when things get hard, the answer is to give up. Because that's not the man I want you to grow up to be. He held them for a long time, and Evelyn stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. This was what bravery looked like. Not fearlessness, but love strong enough to face fear anyway. Finally, Caleb got the boys settled and came out into the hallway. When he saw Evelyn, he stopped. "You're still here." "Where else would I be?" He moved closer, and in the dim light she could see every line of exhaustion on his face, every scar, every sign of the battle he'd been fighting for months. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. In case I don't get another chance." "Caleb, no, let me say this." He took her hands. "When you showed up here, half frozen and desperate, I thought you were just another problem I didn't need. Another person to worry about, another mouth to feed. I wanted you gone as soon as possible. I remember. But you stayed, and you fought, and you made me remember what it feels like to not be alone." His voice dropped. "You made me remember what it feels like to have hope, to have something worth fighting for beyond just land and legacy." Evelyn's throat was tight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying that if we survive tomorrow, I want you to stay. Not as hired help. Not as someone I pay wages to. As my wife. As the boy's mother. As—" He stopped, searching for words. "As everything. If you'll have me." The world seemed to stop. Evelyn looked at this man. This stubborn, broken, brave man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who'd given her a place when the whole world had turned its back, who'd taught her that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built, even when the ground kept shifting under your feet. "Yes," she said. "When this is over, yes." He pulled her close, and she wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart beating against hers. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other like they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice muffled against her hair. "Me too." "But you're still staying." "Where else would I go? This is home." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and then he kissed her, desperate and gentle and full of everything they couldn't say. All the fear and hope and love that had been building for months, compressed into this one moment when tomorrow might not come. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Stay alive tomorrow," he said. "You too." "I'll try." The next morning came too fast. Evelyn woke in her narrow cot, dressed in the dark, and went downstairs to find everyone already awake. No one had slept much. They moved through breakfast like ghosts, checking weapons, running through plans one more time. The boys stayed upstairs. Evelyn had given them strict instructions. No matter what they heard, they stayed hidden. If the house was breached, they were to run for the root cellar and not come out until someone they trusted came to get them. Thomas had nodded, trying to be brave. Levi had cried. Around mid-morning, the lookout spotted riders on the horizon. "Here they come," Hayes called out. Everyone took their positions. Evelyn's hands were steady now, all the shaking gone. She'd crossed some line in the night, moved past fear into a place where there was just action and determination and the cold weight of the gun in her hand. The riders came in force. Had to be 40 of them now, maybe more. Vance had brought every gun he could hire. They spread out in a loose circle around the property, surrounding the house. Vance rode forward again, stopping at the same spot as yesterday. This time, Clayton was beside him, rifle across his saddle. "Time's up, Boone," Vance called out. "You signing papers, or are we doing this the hard way?" Caleb stepped out onto the porch, Garrett beside him. "I'm not signing anything." "Then you're a dead man." "Maybe, but I won't be alone." Caleb gestured at the house, the surrounding area where ranchers were positioned. "You want this land, you're going to have to kill a federal marshal and a dozen witnesses. Think your lawyers can get you out of that?" "I think dead men don't testify." "But I will," another voice called out from behind Vance's line. Everyone turned. Riding up from the south was another group, not as big as Vance's force, but substantial. And at their head was a man Evelyn didn't recognize, wearing a badge that caught the morning light. Marshal Garrett smiled. "Right on time." The new marshal rode through Vance's line, his men parting to let him through, and pulled up next to Garrett. "Marshal Thompson, out of Denver. Got your telegram about federal interference in territorial commerce. Brought some deputies to help sort things out." He looked at Vance. "You must be the railroad man I've been hearing about." Well, Vance's confident expression was starting to crack. "This is a private business matter." "No, sir, it's not. It's attempted murder, conspiracy, and about 6 other federal crimes. And you're under arrest." "On what evidence?" On the evidence of 14 sworn statements, 3 eyewitness accounts from federal officers, and the fact that right now you've got 40 armed men surrounding a family's home, Thompson gestured to his deputies. Clayton, you're under arrest too. So's anyone else who fired a weapon at this property in the last month. Clayton's hand moved toward his rifle. Don't, Thompson said flatly, but I've got 20 deputies here, and every one of them is a better shot than you. You reach for that weapon, you die where you sit. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Evelyn held her breath, finger on the trigger, ready for the shooting to start. Then Clayton's hand moved away from his rifle. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands. The fight went out of Vance's men like air from a punctured tire. One by one, they raised their hands. The deputies moved in, confiscating weapons, making arrests. Vance sat his horse, his face purple with rage. This isn't over. I'll have your badge for this, Thompson. I'll have all your badges. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do. You're a small-time land grabber with delusions of importance, and you're going to trial. Thompson nodded to his deputies. Take him in. They pulled Vance off his horse, cuffed him, and led him away. He was still shouting threats as they loaded him into a wagon, but nobody was listening anymore. It was over. The realization hit Evelyn like a wave. Her knees went weak, and she had to grab the window frame to stay upright. Around her, the ranchers were starting to lower their weapons, their faces showing the same stunned disbelief. They'd won. Caleb came back inside, and the moment he saw her, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, shaking now that the danger had passed, all the fear she'd been holding back crashing over her at once. It's over, he said against her hair. It's over. Is it really? Yeah, I think it is. Upstairs, she heard the boys' door open, heard their footsteps on the stairs. They appeared in the doorway, their faces cautious, hopeful. Pa? Thomas asked. Are the bad men gone? They're gone, son. All of them. Levi ran to his father, and Caleb scooped him up with his free arm, holding both his sons and Evelyn like he'd never let go. They stood there in the middle of the ransacked house, surrounded by ranchers who were starting to laugh and cry and shake hands. And for the first time in months, Evelyn felt something she'd almost forgotten. Safety. The next few weeks were a blur. Marshal Thompson stayed to document everything, taking statements, collecting evidence. Vance was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, arson, and a dozen other crimes. His trial was set for summer, and the territorial prosecutor was confident he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. Clayton and his men were charged as accomplices. Most of them took plea deals, testifying against Vance in exchange for shorter sentences. The ranch slowly came back to life. The barn was rebuilt, this time with help from every rancher in the area. The cattle that had scattered were rounded up. The windows were replaced, the bullet holes patched, and Evelyn started teaching again. It started with Thomas and Levi, lessons at the kitchen table, but word spread, and soon other families were asking if she'd teach their children too. By March, she had 8 students, by April, 12. They used the newly rebuilt barn, the section that wasn't for livestock. Caleb helped her build desks and benches. The ranchers donated books. It wasn't much, but it was a school, a real one. One evening in late April, as spring finally started to thaw the frozen ground, Caleb found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "You look happy," he said, sitting beside her. "I am. Strange, isn't it? After everything." "Not strange, just earned." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what I said before the fight." Evelyn's heart skipped. And? "And I meant it. Every word." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they were married. She wore it for 40 years until the day she died." He held it out to Evelyn. "I'd like you to have it, if the offer's still good." Evelyn took the ring, feeling the weight of history in it. "Are you asking me to marry you, Caleb Boone?" "I am, and I'm doing it proper this time. Not because I need help with the house or the boys, not because of survival or convenience. I'm asking because I love you, because you made me believe in things I'd stopped believing in, because when I think about the future, you're in every part of it." The boys already asked them. Thomas said it's about time. Levi said he's been calling you Ma in his head for 2 months anyway. A smile tugged at Caleb's mouth. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Evelyn looked at this man who'd given her a home when she had nowhere else to go, who'd fought beside her, trusted her, let her see him at his weakest and still chose her anyway. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, soft and certain, and Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. Not just happiness, though she was happy, but something bigger, a sense of rightness, of finally being where she belonged. They were married 3 weeks later, in the front yard of the ranch with half the territory in attendance. The same ranchers who'd stood with them during the siege now stood witness to their vows. Marshal Garrett came, and Marshal Thompson. Even Jack got misty-eyed, though he'd deny it later. Thomas and Levi stood beside their father, dressed in their best clothes, grinning like they'd won something precious. And maybe they had. After the ceremony, as the sun set and people started dancing to a fiddle someone had brought, Evelyn found herself standing apart from the crowd, watching Caleb dance with Levi, the boy standing on his father's boots and laughing, watching Thomas talking seriously with Marshal Garrett about law enforcement, watching her students run around the yard, their parents calling after them. This was her life now. This ranch, these people, this community she'd helped save. Hayes came to stand beside her, a cup of something strong in his hand. You did good, Mrs. Boone. The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Boone. She had a name again, a place again. We all did, she said. Maybe, but you started it. You're the one who rode to Helena, who refused to give up. He raised his cup. To you, the woman who saved the territory. I didn't save anything. I just refused to run. Sometimes that's the same thing. Later, after the guests had gone and the boys were asleep upstairs, Evelyn and Caleb stood in their bedroom, the room that had been his alone and was now theirs. The lamp cast soft shadows, and outside the wind whispered through the new barn. You tired? Caleb asked, pulling off his jacket. Exhausted, happy, terrified. Evelyn laughed. Is that normal? I don't know. Never done this before. Well, I have, but... He stopped, his expression going complicated. It's all right, Evelyn said gently. I know this room was yours and hers. I know this whole house was. I'm not trying to replace her. You're not. You couldn't. He came to her, taking her hands. She was who I needed then. You're who I need now. There's no competition, no comparison, just you and me, and whatever we build together. And the boys. And the boys. He smiled. Think you're ready for that? Being a mother? Probably not. But I'll figure it out. She squeezed his hands. We'll figure it out. Yeah, we will. He kissed her then, and Evelyn felt the last piece of her old life fall away. The desperate woman who'd walked into a blizzard with nothing but $12 and a prayer. The outcast school teacher with nowhere to go. She was someone new now. Someone who'd fought for what was hers and won. Someone who belonged. The months that followed weren't perfect. Thomas had nightmares for weeks. Levi clung to Evelyn like he was afraid she'd disappear. The ranch was still recovering financially, and some nights they went to bed wondering how they'd pay for feed or repairs. But they managed. Evelyn's school brought in a little income. Caleb sold some cattle at good prices. The territory started to settle, and with Vance gone, other families moved in. Good people looking for honest work and land to call their own. By summer, the ranch was thriving again. The herd had grown. The crops came in strong, and Evelyn's school had 23 students with plans to build a proper schoolhouse by next fall. One evening in August, Caleb came in from working the north pasture to find Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper with a strange expression. What's that? He asked, washing his hands. A letter from Mrs. Pritchard. His expression darkened. What does that woman want? To apologize, apparently. Says she heard what I did, writing to Helena, standing against Vance. Says she was wrong about me. Says the school board is willing to offer me my teaching position back if I want it. Caleb went very still. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. Just got the letter today. Evelyn set it down. What do you think I should tell her? That's your decision. If you want to go back, I don't. She stood, moving to where he stood by the sink. This is my home. These are my students. That's my school, the one we're building together. I don't want her job or her apology or anything else from that town. She took his hand. I want this. You, the boys, this life we're making. Relief flooded his face. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady and real. I love you, he said quietly, in case I don't say it enough. You say it plenty, and I love you too. They stood there in the kitchen as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Through the window, they could see the boys playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening air. This was what victory looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and hard-won and worth every fight it had taken to get here. Evelyn had walked into a blizzard with nothing. Now she had everything: a home, a family, a future, and she'd never let it go. Years later, when people asked her about that winter, about the stand against Vance, about the woman who'd ridden through a blizzard to save a ranch, Evelyn would smile and say it wasn't really about her. It was about people refusing to be pushed around, about standing together when standing alone would have meant death. But in her heart, she knew the truth. It was about choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, about fighting for something even when the odds were impossible, about building a home not just with wood and nails, but with courage and love and the kind of stubborn determination that refuses to give up. She'd arrived at Caleb Boone's ranch a desperate woman with no future. She'd left that woman behind and become someone new, someone who'd fought, someone who'd won, someone who'd finally found her way home.